Let's just give him a few more minutes. Goddamn kids.
Hey, welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone's doing well out there. And today we're going to talk about the second entry in a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. After the success of the first Nightmare on Elm Street, which was well received and made a lot of money compared to the budget, Bob Shaye quickly wanted to make a sequel. Obviously, this film came out a little less than a year after the first film was released. Now, they had a script written by a gentleman named Jason Chaskins, who worked for New Line in certain capacities. And they showed it to Wes Craven, but Wes Craven wasn't interested in it. So Wes Craven went off to do other things, and they brought in a new director. Plus, Wes Craven never thought of Nightmare on Elm Street he never thought there was going to be sequels past the first film. That was always his intention. Obviously, he came back to work on Part 3 a little bit, and then A New Nightmare in the 90s, but at the time, he didn't see anything past the first film. Now, off the success of the first film, New Line didn't make a whole lot of money off that film. Yes, they made some money, and they got some credibility in Hollywood, but they were still struggling with cash. So Bob Shaye was excited for the prospects of parlaying the success of the first one into a sequel, so he can make the company more viable. Hence, we had a sequel less than a year later. Now, since Wes Craven wasn't going to come back, Bob Shaye turned to somebody that New Line had worked before, cutting trailers, and he directed their first produced horror film, which was Alone in the Dark in '82, and that gentleman is Jack Shoulder. Him and Bob Shaye were friends, or at least they knew each other. Obviously, they'd worked together before, so they offered to Jack Shoulder, and he took the job. And after this, Jack Shoulder went on in '87 to make a cool little kick-ass action sci-fi movie called The Hidden. If you've never seen that, check that out because it kicks ass. It's a little bizarre, but it's a really cool little film. So they got a bigger budget, $3 million, which was an upgrade from the first film, obviously. When this movie was released in '85, it made $30 million. It's an hour and 27 minutes long, and obviously it's rated R. Now, they never talked about bringing Nancy Thompson's character back, so Heather Langenkamp was never approached about coming back for this film, which is kind of odd considering most sequels, at least in Halloween, they always brought back somebody from the movie before. This film, they did not. Everybody that was from the original film was out except for Robert Englund. A whole new cast was brought in. But Robert Englund wasn't originally brought back. See, Robert Englund's agent wanted to ask Bob Shaye for more money, considering the success of the first film and how highly regarded Freddy Krueger's performance was. Robert Englund's performance was as Freddy Krueger. Bob Shaye didn't want to pay it. So they brought somebody else in who filmed for 2 weeks as Freddy Krueger. And Bob Shaye finally realized he made a huge mistake, paid Robert Englund his money. Robert Englund came in and shot the film. Now, in this film, we have a brand new lead, and the first time, or the only time in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise where the lead is played by a male, and Mark Patton plays Jesse. Him and his family just moved into Nancy Thompson's old house on Elm Street in Springwood. Kim Myers plays Lisa. She is Jesse's girlfriend. Well, first they say they're just friends, but later on in the film, they're in love, or whatever. She plays Lisa, and she is a part of this story as well. And Clu Gulager, who is always fun to be on screen. I know a lot of people remember him from Return of the Living Dead. Plays Mr. Walsh, or Jesse's father. And Marshall Bell plays Coach Schneider. And Marshall Bell was in a couple of Paul Verhoeven films, Total Recall and Starship Troopers, and he's always fun to have on screen. And this one, he kind of plays a scumbag for sure, but we'll get into that as we go along down the line. Now, this film, obviously, like I said, everybody from the first film's out except for Robert Englund. A whole new cast. This movie kind of ignores any rules that Wes Craven sets up in the first film, which is kind of to its own detriment, and we'll get to that as we go along. We get the opening scene, which I do like a lot, with Jesse on a school bus going to school, and the school bus starts going really fast and goes off into the desert. And all of a sudden, we see Freddy Krueger is driving the bus, and the ground breaks away from underneath the bus, and it's teeter-tottering on this just pillar of rock. And we see this red light coming up from below. We assume it's hell below. They don't really go into that. And we get our first scene where Freddy kills a girl and goes after Jesse, and Jesse wakes up screaming in his new house they just moved into, which is, again, Nancy Thompson's old house. Jesse starts having these weird dreams in the middle of the night. Nightmare on Elm Street, baby. But the problem with this film, well, let's go on. I'll go to my positives. Let's go down to plot first. We'll go talk about some positives. We'll get into some negatives. Because I do have a bunch of negatives for this film. It has more to do with the structure of the film and the way it was written. And I think there's a good reason why Wes Craven didn't want to do this film. Jesse starts seeing more and more visions of Freddy Krueger, and actually he finds the glove in the basement and it ends up on his hand, like he's sleepwalking. He doesn't know what's going on. He's having a tough time with it. Lisa tries to help him, and he even turns to the school. This guy that was bullying him at first, they kind of become friends, Rod. And I'm going to skip over a lot of things just to get to some of the positives, get this moving, this review, because I can go on and on about this film. Finally, towards the end of the film, Jesse goes to see Rod in the middle of the night. His girlfriend Lisa is having a pool party. He leaves from making out with Lisa and goes to Rod's house and says, look, I'm going to go to sleep. If anything weird happens, wake me up. And this is where we get probably the best makeup effects, best makeup effect of the whole film. Though there are some other really cool effects in this film, but this is probably the best. Jesse goes up against the wall, his mouth opens, you can see an eyeball in the back of his throat, and all of a sudden his hand starts growing the finger knives, Freddy's glove, and his skin starts splitting apart, and Freddy bursts out of his chest and appears in Rod's room and kills Rod. And then we get that scene at the pool, which we're going to talk about because that's one of the problems with this film. And then towards the end, Lisa helps Jesse. Jesse turns into Freddy Krueger because Freddy Krueger has possessed Jesse's body. They go to this old steel plant, and Lisa talks Jesse to coming back. Freddy lights on fire, he melts off, Jesse's left over, and then we get our twist ending like we did in the first film, where Jesse gets on the bus with Lisa and some other friends, and the glove bursts out of the one girl's chest, and that's the end of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Some of the positive things. Freddy is still dark in this film. He does have a couple one-liners, but it's not for jokes. That comes Part 3 and through the rest of the series until we get to the New Nightmare, where that kind of dies down a little bit, thanks to Wes Craven coming back. But he does have a couple one-liners, but Freddy is dark and vicious in this film. For sure, no doubt. And Mark Patton he's good in the role of Jesse. This was kind of like, and I know he even says in the documentary Never Sleep Again, which I'm going to talk about all through this series, because it's an excellent documentary, especially if you like this series. It's great. Check it out. It's on YouTube for free. You can watch it whenever you want, stop it whenever you want. He even said he considers himself the first male scream queen, which is kind of right, because he does scream a lot during this film. But he's good as Jesse. He's this troubled young man who doesn't know what's going on with him. He's going through changes, puberty, obviously. There's a lot of homoerotic undertones in this film. That's me saying that. It's the filmmakers who watched the documentary even go into it. They didn't even realize at the time. Jack Shoulder said he was oblivious to what was going on. And now when he watches, he could see the gay undertones, but at the time he had no idea. I don't know how, but a bunch of people that worked on this film say they had no idea that there was all this homoerotic imagery in the film. It's like, really? I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't realize it, but as an adult, you can pick it out right away, which is no big deal, but it's like, you didn't realize at the time you were making this? I find that hard to believe. But Mark Patton's good as Jesse. He's fine. Kim Myers is fine as Lisa. This was her first acting role in a movie. Clu Gulager is good as the father. And Marshall Bell's fun as Coach Snyder. The guy that plays Rod is good. The actors aren't bad. The makeup effects are good. I thought they were really pulled off, especially the one where Freddy comes out of Jesse's body is really well done. Freddy's makeup looks good in some scenes, depending on the lighting. It doesn't look good in others, especially the pool scene, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There's some cool set pieces during the film. I got to give them credit, and they were bold in some of the decisions they made because they went a completely opposite direction as the first film. But that's also to its detriment. I think with the first sequel in a series, I could see if this was down the line, going in a new direction to make it fresh. Doing this right after the success of the first film, I think that's why it doesn't work as well as I think they hoped it did. I know it wasn't very well received. Now, it didn't make a lot of money. It even made more money than the original film. I just think that they were going in so much of a new direction, considering it's only the second film. I know I personally would rather have seen the next exploits with Nancy Thompson's character back and Freddy Krueger. Now, they rectified Nancy Thompson being in the film in Part 3. She came back. But with this one, it's such a departure from the first one, and there's some scenes that just don't work, like the pool party scene. Freddy's the scariest when he's in Dream World. Now, I know in the first film, when Nancy brings him out, that's how we resolve this problem, although we think until the end. But even in the real world, they keep him in darkness in the first film. It's in Nancy's house, there's not a lot of lights on, so he still has that air of being scary. In this film, he's fine when he's in the dream world. The problem is when they bring him out into the light. And that pool party scene is the biggest example of that because it's brightly lit, even though it's at night. Freddy comes out, bursting out, which looks hilarious to begin with. It's like a what the F moment. And then you have all these teenagers running around trying to go away from him, but they're taller than him, they're bigger built than him. And he's in the real world. I could just imagine one of those kids walking up to him, punch him in the face and knocking him out. Because Freddy in the real world is not indestructible, for Christ's sake. So that kind of scenes don't work. And then the whole possession thing, like I said, this is where I think they were bold in what they were doing. I just don't think it works considering this is the first sequel out of the gate. This is like the sixth sequel where you decide to do something totally new and go in a new direction. It just doesn't work for me. Like all of a sudden Freddy's in the real world, he can manipulate the real world. That bird scene's also a terrible freaking scene. It has no reason to be in the goddamn movie other than to show a shitty effect. It's just weird that they decided to go this right out of the gate. I mean, you gotta give them credit, they did something different, but I think part 3 is the kind of different that I really like part 3. I'm playing my hand here before I review it. But I think part 3 is the right way to go to push the story forward. This was kind of its own movie. Like it doesn't really even fit in with the other films besides the fact that they reference Nancy Thompson because they find her diary in Jesse's room and they read from it and discover about Freddy more. I mean, I know it's a good metaphor for Jesse going through changes in his life, but to me, this is more like the Amityville Horror 2, The Possession, than it is a Nightmare on Elm Street film. It's just using Freddy as the possessor. I don't know. It doesn't totally work. I can still sit down and watch this film, and it's okay. I know I don't like some of the other sequels down the line a lot more than I don't like this one. We'll get to those. I mean, I do like 3, but after that, my enjoyment of now I haven't seen any of these films in at least a decade, so it's pretty much fresh eyes upon these films as I watched them. I'll see if my feelings change on 4, 5, and 6. I know 6 is a dumpster fire. Maybe I'll change my mind on that. Maybe I'll have some fun with it, but I never really cared for 6. And 4 and 5 is, so we'll see. But this film does have some merits to it. Again, the acting's not the worst. Jack Shoulder keeps the pace moving for the most part. I don't agree with all of his choices, but I know he was also at the whim of Bob Shea, was on the set every day micromanaging everything they say in the documentary. And that's a hard way to make a film. Now, Michael J. Fox was originally considered to play Jesse, but he couldn't do it because he was working on a little film called Back to the Future and Teen Wolf, so he couldn't do it. Jack Shoulder had a hard time directing the pool house scene when Jesse and Lisa are making out. He just kept cracking up, so he had to step off set and let somebody else direct that scene. There's a cameo by Bob Shea in the movie. Jesse goes to this S&M club, and Bob Shea plays the bartender. And there's a really funny story in the documentary about Jack Shoulder telling Bob Shea to go to this clothing store, and it's a S&M store, and he takes his 2 daughters with him, and the guy that's working the counter says, "I'd ask your daughters to step outside while you make your purchases." It's a pretty cool little story. And Brad Pitt, John Stamos, and Christian Slater all auditioned for Jesse, and they went with Mark Patton. Now at the time, those names didn't mean a whole lot, but today, looking back on it, it's pretty fun. I think, again, like I said, wrapping this up, I think the script tried to be ambitious, take this in a different direction, and I got to give them credit for being bold. I just don't think they don't pull it off, and I think it was too much a departure from the first film, which came out a little less than a year before this was released. Although, again, it made a lot of money at the box office, but I think that's also why in the third one they tried to right a lot of the wrongs that this film did. I just don't think it works. You bring Freddy out into the daylight all the time into the real world, he's not as scary. Again, some of the dream sequences are pretty tense, but once they pull him out at that pool party, it becomes kind of laughable. And even Robert Englund says he didn't feel real good about shooting that scene. Even the cinematographer said the same thing. He goes, "I don't know how to make this scary. We're lighting it bright. I can't do anything with this other than I'm going to light it the way they want me to, and we're going to shoot this thing." It just doesn't work. And they do kind of give the middle finger to a lot of the rules that Wes Craven set forward in the first film, because there was rules set up for Freddy. And this movie kind of just says, screw you, we're going to do our own thing. Again, this was the 5th or 6th sequel in the series. I say go for it. Do something different. But the first sequel out of the gate, I think that's where they went wrong, honestly. But other than that, this is a fine enough sequel. It's not my favorite. It's not the worst sequel in the series. We'll get to those. Trust me, we will get to those as the weeks go on. I would give this one a 6 out of 10. There's some cool moments. There's some really good effects work in the film. There's a couple shitty effects in the film, but again, they were moving so fast. And even though the budget was increased, they were trying to do a lot with only $3 million. So yeah, I can cut him some slack on that. But yes, a 6 out of 10 for Nightmare on Elm Street 2. What are your thoughts on this sequel? Leave a comment down below, let me know. Hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, share this video, I greatly would appreciate that. I'll be back later in the week with Godzilla vs. Kong, because that drops tomorrow. I'm going to watch tomorrow night, get a review out by the end of the week. Next week, I'll be back with Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and I think I'm going to do 4 as well, and then the week after, 5 and 6, and then New Nightmare, and then the remake. So I hope you're all doing well out there, and until later, I'm just going to say bye.